Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Perfect Facade. Brett Owens adjusted his Rolex as he pushed 8-year-old Emma on the swing set at Riverside Park. The autumn afternoon painted everything in golden hues, and his daughter's laughter carried on the crisp October breeze. At 42, Brett had built an empire from nothing, starting with a single construction crew and expanding into luxury real estate development across 3 states. His weathered hands and sharp gray eyes told the story of a man who'd clawed his way to the top and never looked back. "Higher, Daddy," Emma squealed, her auburn hair streaming behind her like a banner. She had inherited Kelsey's delicate features, but Brett's fierce determination, even at such a young age. Brett's phone buzzed with another business call, but he ignored it. Saturdays belonged to Emma. It was a rule he'd established when Kelsey started complaining that he worked too much. His wife of 12 years had grown increasingly distant lately, always shopping with her sister Rosa or attending her book club meetings that seemed to run later each week. Brett Owens, he turned to find a woman approaching, mid-30s, blonde, nervous energy radiating from her like heat. She kept glancing around as if someone might be watching. "That's me." Brett's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being in control. He slowed Emma's swing with one powerful hand. "I'm Marion Byers. My husband Dan works at the medical center downtown." She paused, wringing her hands. "Look, this is awkward, but your wife approached Dan last week. She offered him $500 to spend an hour alone with your daughter." The world seemed to tilt. Brett's jaw clenched, and Emma looked between the adults, sensing the sudden tension. "What exactly are you saying, Mrs. Byers?" "Dan told me immediately. He was horrified. We have kids too, and—" Marion's voice dropped to a whisper. "He said she was very specific about wanting Emma to trust him, to be comfortable around him. It didn't sit right with either of us." Brett's mind raced through recent conversations with Kelsey. Her insistence that Emma needed to be more social. Her suggestions that Emma spend time with other adults to build confidence. The new photography hobby that required expensive equipment and private sessions. "Where can I reach your husband?" Brett's voice remained steady, but his knuckles had gone white gripping the swing's chain. Marion handed him a business card. "He's at the hospital today, but he gets off at 6. Brett, we're parents too. We couldn't just ignore this." After Marion left, Brett sat on the bench watching Emma play, his mind working like the calculating machine that had made him millions. Every successful project required careful planning, and this situation would be no different. But first, he needed information. "Come on, princess. Let's go get some ice cream." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That evening, Brett waited until Kelsey was in the shower before accessing her phone. She'd always been careless with passwords, using Emma's birthday for everything. His wife's betrayal unfolded in a digital trail of text messages, photos, and deleted emails he recovered with software from his security company. The messages with Javier Heath started innocuously 6 months ago. Compliments about her appearance at Emma's school events. Suggestions for coffee dates that became lunch meetings, then afternoon encounters at the Riverside Hotel. But the recent messages made Brett's blood turn to ice. "The little girl is perfect. Exactly what we discussed. When can you arrange it?" "Brett travels next week. Emma will be with the babysitter Tuesday. She trusts easily. Payment as discussed. Half now, half after." Brett's hands shook as he scrolled through Javier's responses. This man had been grooming his wife to deliver Emma into a situation that Brett couldn't even fully comprehend without losing his sanity. When Kelsey emerged from the bathroom, humming softly and wrapping her robe around her slim frame, Brett was sitting on their bed, her phone in his hands. "Honey, is everything okay?" She stopped when she saw his expression. "Get dressed, Kelsey. We're going for a drive." "What?" "It's almost 10 o'clock, and Emma's asleep. Emma's coming with us." Brett's voice carried a finality that made Kelsey step back. "You're going to wake her up, tell her we're going to get ice cream, and the 3 of us are going to take a little trip downtown." Something in Brett's tone made Kelsey's face go pale. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it when she saw the way he was looking at her, like a predator that had cornered its prey. 20 minutes later, They pulled into the parking lot of the downtown police station. Emma slept in her car seat, clutching her stuffed elephant. Kelsey sat rigid in the passenger seat, her breathing shallow. "Brett, please, whatever you think." "Shut up." He turned to face her, and she saw something in his gray eyes that made her blood freeze. "You sold our daughter, Kelsey. You took money to hand her over to a predator." I would never hurt Emma." "You already have." Brett got out of the car and opened Emma's door. She stirred sleepily as he lifted her out. Inside the station, Detective Randall Ferguson listened as Brett laid out everything he'd discovered. Ferguson, a veteran with 20 years on the force, had seen enough to remain calm while taking notes, but his jaw tightened as Brett showed him the text messages. "Mr. Owens, we'll need to examine the phone, interview your wife, and bring in this Javier Heath for questioning. You did the right thing coming here." Brett nodded, but his mind was already working beyond the immediate legal implications. The police would handle their part, but Brett Owens had never relied on others to solve his problems. What Detective Ferguson told him next changed everything. "Sir, I have to inform you that Javier Heath is already on our radar. He's been under surveillance for suspected involvement in a network we've been tracking for 8 months. Your wife's communications might be the break we've been looking for." Brett felt something cold and calculating settle in his chest. Kelsey hadn't just betrayed their family. She'd unwittingly connected him to something much larger. And that gave him options he hadn't considered. As they drove home in silence, Emma sleeping peacefully in the back seat and Kelsey staring out the window with tears streaming down her face, Brett began planning. The legal system would take its course, but justice and revenge were two different things entirely. By the time they reached their house, Brett had already decided that both Kelsey and Javier Heath would pay a price that went far beyond anything the courts could impose. Chapter 2. Gathering Ammunition. The next morning dawned gray and cold, matching Brett's mood as he sat in his home office reviewing security footage from his construction sites. He'd built his reputation on being thorough, and now that same methodical approach would serve a different purpose entirely. Emma was at school, unaware that her world had shifted overnight. Brett had explained to her that Mommy wasn't feeling well and needed a rest, which wasn't entirely untrue. Kelsey had locked herself in the guest bedroom after Brett calmly informed her that she would not be leaving the house until further notice. "Javier Heath," Brett muttered, studying the man's social media profiles on his computer screen. 38 years old, divorced, worked as a medical equipment sales representative. His LinkedIn showed a successful career, charity work, and a bright smile that probably charmed parents at school functions. Brett's phone rang. "Detective Ferguson." "Mr. Owens, we've arrested Heath." He lawyered up immediately, but we found some interesting items during our search warrant execution. "However, I need to tell you something about your wife's involvement." "I'm listening." "She's not just a victim here. The communications suggest she was actively recruiting for Heath's operation. Your daughter wasn't going to be his first target." The words hit Brett like a physical blow, but his voice remained steady. "How many others?" "We're still investigating, but it appears your wife received payments for at least 3 previous introductions over the past year. Parents who trusted her judgment about babysitters and tutors." After hanging up, Brett sat in his leather chair, staring out at the manicured lawn that Kelsey had insisted on hiring a service to maintain. She'd always been good at creating perfect surfaces while hiding rot underneath. His private investigator, Isaac Moore, called an hour later. Brett had put Isaac on retainer years ago for business due diligence, but now he had a different assignment. "Brett, I got what you asked for. Heath's been running this operation for at least 2 years, but here's the interesting part. He's not the one at the top. There's a network, and your wife was being groomed to become a regional coordinator." "What does that mean?" "It means she was actively building a client base of vulnerable children and families. The money she was receiving was performance-based. The more successful introduction she made, the more her cut increased." Brett closed his eyes, processing the magnitude of Kelsey's betrayal. It wasn't a moment of weakness or poor judgment. It was calculated, ongoing participation in something monstrous. "Isaac, I need you to dig deeper. I want to know everything about Heath's operation, his associates, his routines, his weaknesses. And I want to know exactly how much money Kelsey made from this. Already on it. But Brett, be careful. If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, just give me the information. Brett spent the afternoon reviewing his business contacts, identifying resources he might need. His construction company had connections throughout the city: electricians, plumbers, concrete suppliers, demolition crews. Men who knew how to build things and, when necessary, make them disappear. At 3 o'clock, he picked up Emma from school, maintaining the routine to keep her world stable. She chattered about her day, her art project, her friend's upcoming birthday party. Brett listened, responding appropriately, while his mind calculated distances, timelines, and opportunities. "Daddy, is Mommy really sick?" Emma asked as they drove past the ice cream shop where they'd been headed the previous night. "Mommy made some bad choices, sweetheart. Grown-up choices that have consequences. Like when I didn't clean my room and lost my tablet time. Something like that." Brett squeezed her small hand. "But you don't need to worry about it. Daddy's going to take care of everything." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Brett confronted Kelsey in the guest room. She looked haggard, her usually perfect blonde hair unkempt, her makeup smeared from crying. "The police told me about the other children," Brett said, closing the door behind him. Kelsey looked up from the bed where she'd been sitting in her robe, hugging a pillow. "I never meant for it to go this far. Javier said it was just about giving kids opportunities to build confidence with adult mentors." "Don't." Brett's voice cut through her explanation like a blade. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you didn't know exactly what you were doing. Brett, please. You made $50,000 over the past year, Kelsey. 50,000 pieces of silver for selling children to a predator." Her face crumpled. "I thought we needed the money. You're always working, always stressed about the business. We have $3 million in our personal accounts alone. This wasn't about money." Brett pulled out a folder and dropped it on the bed. Inside were printouts of her text messages, bank records, and photos Isaac had compiled showing her meeting with Heath and other associates. This was about the thrill, wasn't it? The secret life, the feeling of being special, being trusted with something important. Kelsey's silence was answer enough. "Here's what's going to happen," Brett continued, his voice calm and methodical. "You're going to cooperate fully with the police investigation. You're going to provide every detail about Heath's operation and everyone involved. And then you're going to disappear." "What do you mean?" "I mean you're going to leave town, change your name, and never contact Emma or me again. You'll sign over all parental rights and take nothing from our marriage except the clothes on your back." "You can't make me." Brett stepped closer, and Kelsey shrank back against the headboard. "The alternative is that I make sure every parent in this city knows exactly what you did. Every detail. I'll put billboards up with your picture and your crimes. I'll make sure you can never show your face anywhere without someone recognizing you as the woman who sold children to predators." "Brett, Emma needs her mother. Emma needs protection from her mother." Brett's gray eyes were cold as winter steel. "You have 24 hours to decide. Cooperate and disappear, or face the consequences of refusing." He left Kelsey sobbing in the guest room and went to his office to review Isaac's latest report. Javier Heath owned a cabin in the mountains, 2 hours north of the city. He had a pattern of taking long weekends there, usually alone. His ex-wife lived across the country, and they had no children together. Most importantly, Heath had made bail that afternoon, a detail Detective Ferguson had forgotten to mention. Brett smiled for the first time since the playground encounter. A man who preyed on children shouldn't be walking free, and Brett Owens had never been one to wait for the system to do what needed to be done. He opened his safe and removed the .45 caliber pistol he'd carried in the Army, before he'd learned that building empires was more profitable than fighting wars. Some lessons from his military service, however, were about to prove valuable again. By midnight, Brett had a plan that would ensure Javier Heath never threatened another child, and that everyone who'd enabled him would face consequences proportional to their crimes. The police investigation was just beginning, but Brett's personal war was about to commence. Chapter 3: The Trap Springs. Brett stood in his driveway at 5 a.m., loading camping gear into his black Ford F-350. To any observer, He was a father taking a weekend trip to decompress after a family crisis. The reality was considerably more complex. Emma was spending the weekend with Kelsey's sister Rosa, who remained blissfully unaware of the previous week's revelations. Rosa had always disliked Brett, considering him too controlling and demanding, but she adored Emma and jumped at the chance to help during what she assumed was a rough patch in the marriage. "Remember what we discussed?" Brett told Kelsey as she sat at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She'd agreed to his terms, choosing exile over exposure, but the paperwork wouldn't be finalized for several days. "I meet with the lawyer Monday morning, sign everything, and leave Tuesday," she whispered. "And if you get any ideas about running to the media or trying to spin this as some kind of misunderstanding, I won't." Her voice was barely audible. "I know what I did. I know what I am." Brett nodded and walked out, leaving his wife to contemplate the ruins of her life. He had no sympathy to spare for her. The drive to Heath's mountain cabin took exactly 97 minutes, following back roads that Brett had scouted twice during the week. Isaac's surveillance had confirmed that Heath arrived Friday evening and typically stayed until Sunday afternoon, using the isolation to conduct video calls with associates who believed he was simply conducting business from a remote location. Heath had no idea that Brett knew about the cabin, or that his bail conditions prohibiting internet access and contact with minors were about to become irrelevant. The cabin sat on 50 acres of wooded property, accessible only by a private dirt road. Heath's silver BMW was parked outside, and smoke rose from the chimney into the cold morning air. Brett parked his truck a quarter-mile away, hidden behind a stand of pine trees, and checked his equipment one final time. He moved through the forest with the silent efficiency he'd learned during 3 tours in Afghanistan, approaching the cabin from the rear, where thick evergreens provided cover to within 20 yards of the structure. Through the kitchen window, he could see Heath making coffee, wearing a robe and looking relaxed despite being out on bail for child endangerment charges. Brett waited. Patience had always been his strongest weapon in business negotiations, and this situation required the same methodical approach. At 10 a.m., Heath's phone rang. From his position, Brett could hear parts of the conversation through the thin cabin walls. "No, I told you. We need to lay low until this blows over. The woman was supposed to be reliable. Yes, I understand the timeline, but rushing now could expose everyone." Heath was still actively coordinating with his network, despite his bail conditions. Brett smiled grimly and activated the recording device he'd brought, insurance for later. When Heath stepped onto the rear deck to continue his call privately, Brett made his move. "Don't turn around and don't raise your voice," Brett said calmly, pressing the barrel of his pistol against the base of Heath's skull. "End the call. Now." Heath's body went rigid. I'll call you back," he managed, then lowered the phone. "Hands behind your back." Brett zip-tied Heath's wrists with the kind of heavy-duty restraints his construction crews use for securing materials. Then he guided the man back inside the cabin and secured him to one of the heavy wooden kitchen chairs. "Brett Owens, I assume," Heath said, his voice steadier than Brett had expected. "You're making a serious mistake." "Am I?" Brett pulled up a chair and sat facing his prisoner. "Let's talk about mistakes, Javier. Like thinking my wife was reliable enough to deliver my daughter to you. I don't know what she told you, but she told me everything. The police told me more. But I'm not here for confessions." Brett placed a digital tablet on the table, showing Heath surveillance photos Isaac had compiled. The man entering hotels with different women over the past year, meeting with known associates of child trafficking networks, and conducting business at locations that had been flagged by federal investigators. "Your operation is finished," Brett continued. "Your associates are scrambling to cover their tracks. Your buyers are going to ground. And you're going to help me understand exactly how this worked. I want a lawyer. You're not under arrest. This is a business conversation between 2 entrepreneurs." Brett stood and walked to the kitchen, where he'd noticed Heath had been preparing what looked like breakfast for 2 people. "Expecting company?" Heath's silence was answer enough. "Gerard Elliott," Brett said, reading a name from one of the documents Isaac had provided. "Your partner in this venture. He's supposed to arrive this afternoon to discuss damage control, isn't he?" Still no response. Brett returned to his chair and leaned forward. Here's how this is going to work, Javier. You're going to call Gerard and confirm your meeting. You're going to act completely normal. And when he arrives, we're going to have a three-way conversation about accountability. And if I refuse? Brett's smile was cold as Arctic wind. Then I'm going to spend the next several hours demonstrating some techniques I learned in the Army for extracting information from uncooperative subjects. Techniques that leave no permanent physical damage, but create very lasting psychological impressions. He pulled out his phone and showed Heath a video Isaac had compiled. Security footage of Heath approaching children at various public venues over the past 6 months, always with Kelsey or another woman to provide social cover. Every parent of every child you targeted is going to receive a copy of this footage, along with your home address, your work information, and a detailed explanation of what you attempted to do to their children. Heath's composure finally cracked. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with. This network has protection. From who? Local politicians? Police supervisors? Federal agents? Brett laughed. I've been building government contracts for 15 years, Javier. I know exactly which officials can be bought and which ones can't. And I know that none of your protection extends to what happens in these mountains. At 2 p.m., Gerard Elliott's black Escalade appeared on the dirt road leading to the cabin. Brett had positioned Heath back in his chair, hands zip-tied behind him, but concealed by a blanket, making it appear he was simply resting. Remember, Brett whispered, pressing the gun against Heath's ribs, act normal, or this becomes very unpleasant very quickly. Elliott knocked once and entered without waiting for a response, clearly familiar with the cabin and Heath's routines. He was a large man in his 50s, expensively dressed despite the remote location, with the kind of soft features that suggested wealth and comfort. Javier, we need to discuss. Elliott stopped when he saw Brett. Gerard Elliott, I presume. Please have a seat. Elliott's hand moved toward his jacket, but Brett's gun was already pointed at his chest. I wouldn't. Hands where I can see them. Within minutes, Elliott was secured to another chair, his confident demeanor replaced by the kind of fear that comes from suddenly realizing you're no longer in control. Gentlemen, Brett said, pouring himself a cup of Heath's coffee, let's discuss the future of your organization, or rather, the complete dismantling of it. Over the next hour, Brett extracted details about the network's operations, financial structure, and client base. He recorded everything, building a comprehensive case file that would destroy not just Heath and Elliott, but their entire operation. You realize, Elliott said during a brief pause, that eliminating us won't end this. Others will take our place. Maybe, Brett agreed. But they'll know what happens to people who threaten my family. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, Brett made 2 phone calls. The first was to Detective Ferguson, providing GPS coordinates and explaining what he'd uncovered. The second was to Isaac, confirming that certain arrangements had been finalized. The police will be here in about an hour, Brett told his prisoners. That gives us time for one final conversation about consequences. He produced a tablet showing bank account information Isaac had compiled, offshore accounts, shell companies, and financial networks the 2 men had used to launder their profits. I've transferred every dollar you made from this operation to accounts supporting organizations that help traffic children. Consider it restitution. You can't just steal. I didn't steal anything. I recovered proceeds from criminal activity and directed them toward their highest use. It's called justice. Brett checked his watch. 45 minutes until the police arrived. Enough time to ensure that Heath and Elliott understood the full scope of what Brett Owens was capable of when someone threatened his family. By the time Detective Ferguson's team reached the cabin, they found Heath and Elliott secured with evidence of their entire operation laid out systematically. Both men were alive, but exhibited signs of severe psychological trauma that no amount of therapy would completely heal. Brett was long gone, driving back toward the city where he had one final piece of business to conclude with his wife. The network was dismantled, the immediate threat neutralized, but Brett's personal war was not yet finished. Chapter 4. Loose Ends. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth. as if the weather itself was mocking the cold reality of Brett's new world. He sat in his lawyer's office, watching Kelsey sign document after document with a shaking hand. Her sister Rosa waited outside, still believing this was an amicable divorce rather than the systematic destruction of a child predator's accomplice. The house transfer, all business assets, and full custody of Emma, attorney Richard Wells confirmed, sliding the final papers across his mahogany desk. Mrs. Owens retains nothing except her personal effects and the $5,000 we discussed for relocation expenses. Kelsey looked up at Brett with hollow eyes. That's it? 12 years of marriage for $5,000. You earned every penny, Brett replied coldly. Consider yourself fortunate you're walking away with anything. The news coverage of Heath and Elliot's arrest had dominated local media for 3 days. Federal investigators were now involved, unraveling a network that spanned multiple states. Kelsey's cooperation with authorities had kept her name out of the headlines, but that protection would end the moment she violated their agreement. The bus leaves at 3 p.m., Brett told her as they stood outside the law office. Isaac will be watching to make sure you're on it. Brett, Emma will ask about me. Emma will be told that her mother chose to leave, which is the truth. Kelsey started to speak, then stopped. She understood that any argument would only remind Brett of other reasons to ensure her complete destruction. Instead, she nodded and walked toward Rose's car, where her sister waited with questions Brett hoped she'd never learn to ask. At Emma's school, Brett arranged a meeting with Principal Joan Herring and the guidance counselor, Amber Beard. Both women had been following the news coverage and understood the situation without requiring detailed explanations. Emma's been through a traumatic experience, even if she doesn't fully understand it yet, Ms. Beard explained. Children are remarkably resilient, but she'll need stability and honesty appropriate to her age level. She'll have both, Brett assured them. What she won't have is any contact with people who might exploit that trauma for their own purposes. Principal Herring nodded. We've already implemented additional security measures. No one except you and your designated emergency contacts can pick up Emma or have any communication with her during school hours. Brett had spent the weekend carefully considering how to explain Kelsey's absence to Emma. The truth, filtered through age-appropriate language, seemed the kindest approach. That evening, as Emma worked on homework at the kitchen table, Brett sat down beside her. Princess, we need to talk about Mommy. Emma looked up from her math worksheet, her green eyes, so much like Kelsey's, filled with the kind of trust that Brett would spend the rest of his life protecting. Is she still sick? Mommy made some very bad choices that hurt people. Because of those choices, she can't live with us anymore. Will she come back when she's better? Brett's chest tightened. No, sweetheart. She won't be coming back. Emma processed this information with the practical acceptance that children often display in crisis situations. So it's just you and me now? Just you and me. Is that okay? Emma considered this seriously, then nodded. You're the best daddy anyway. Mommy always seemed sad, even when she was smiling. The insight from his 8-year-old daughter hit Brett harder than he'd expected. Children notice things that adults missed, and Emma had apparently sensed Kelsey's dissatisfaction long before Brett had acknowledged it. Daddy loves you more than anything in the world, Brett said, pulling her into a hug. Nothing will ever change that. The following week brought a steady stream of developments. Heath and Elliot had both been denied bail after federal charges were filed. Their network had included 12 other individuals across 4 states, all now under investigation. The media coverage praised the anonymous tip that had led to their capture, never suspecting that the tipster had been personally involved in their interrogation. Isaac stopped by Brett's office Friday afternoon with a final report. Heath's cabin has been sold to a hunting club. Elliot's assets have been seized by federal authorities. And your wife? Isaac paused, checking his notes. She successfully boarded the bus to Denver on Monday and hasn't been seen in this area since. Good. Any word on the other families involved? The children Heath targeted are all receiving counseling. Their parents have been informed about the network's scope, and several are pursuing civil litigation against Heath's estate. Brett nodded, satisfied that the immediate threats had been neutralized. But one loose end remained. That weekend, Brett took Emma camping at Pine Lake, 2 hours south of their city. It was a trip they'd planned before the crisis, and maintaining normal activities seemed important for her emotional recovery. As they sat by their campfire Saturday evening, Emma roasting marshmallows with intense concentration, Brett's phone rang. Detective Ferguson. Brett, I wanted to give you an update. Heath provided information about a federal operation targeting child trafficking networks. His cooperation might reduce his sentence significantly. Brett's jaw tightened. What kind of reduction? Potentially 15 years instead of life without parole. That's unacceptable. I understand your frustration, but no, detective, you don't understand. That man orchestrated the exploitation of children. My wife helped him target my daughter. 15 years isn't justice. After ending the call, Brett stared into the fire, considering options. The legal system had provided partial satisfaction, but true justice required a more personal touch. Emma had fallen asleep in her camp chair, exhausted from a day of hiking and fishing. Brett carried her into their tent, tucking her sleeping bag around her small form. She looked so innocent, so trusting, that the thought of what might have happened if he hadn't discovered Heath's plan made his hands shake with rage. He stepped back outside and called a number he'd hoped never to use again. Frank Erickson speaking. Frank, it's Brett Owens. A pause. Frank had served under Brett in Afghanistan, where they developed the kind of bond that forms between soldiers who depend on each other for survival. Frank now worked private security contracts, the kind of work that didn't appear on official records. Jesus, Brett. I heard about the situation on the news. How's Emma? She's safe. But the man who targeted her is going to get a reduced sentence for cooperation. Another pause, longer this time. I see. What do you need? A conversation. In person. Can you meet me Tuesday? I'll be there. Brett ended the call and returned to watching the fire burn down to embers. Justice delayed was justice denied, and Brett Owens had never been patient with systems that failed to deliver appropriate consequences. By Tuesday, he would have a plan to ensure that Javier Heath never threatened another child, regardless of what deals he might make with federal prosecutors. Some lessons from the Army had never left him, and some enemies didn't deserve the protection of civilized society. Chapter 5. Federal Complications. Tuesday morning brought unexpected developments that would test Brett's carefully laid plans. He was reviewing construction schedules in his office when Detective Ferguson called with news that changed everything. Brett, we have a problem. Heath's been moved to federal custody at an undisclosed location. The trafficking investigation has expanded beyond anything we initially understood. Brett set down his coffee, instantly alert. What does that mean for the local charges? They're being absorbed into a federal case involving multiple agencies. FBI, Homeland Security, U.S. Marshals. Heath isn't just cooperating. He's become a protected witness. The implications hit Brett immediately. Federal protection meant Heath would be isolated from any form of personal justice, potentially relocated with a new identity if his testimony proved valuable enough. Detective, that man was hours away from assaulting my daughter. I understand your frustration, but this is bigger than what happened to your family. Heath's information has already led to arrests in 3 other states. After hanging up, Brett sat in his leather chair, calculating options. Federal protection wasn't impenetrable, but it required resources and connections beyond what most civilians could access. Fortunately, Brett Owens wasn't most civilians. Frank Erickson arrived at Brett's office an hour later, looking every inch the professional soldier despite wearing civilian clothes. At 45, Frank retained the lean build and alert eyes that had made him one of Brett's most reliable subordinates in Afghanistan. You look like hell, Frank observed, settling into the chair across from Brett's desk. I feel worse than I look. What do you know about federal witness protection protocols? Frank's expression grew serious. More than I should. What? Brett explained the situation, watching Frank's face harden as the details emerged. Frank had 2 daughters of his own, ages 10 and 12. Protected witness, Frank said when Brett finished. That complicates things significantly, but not impossibly. Nothing's impossible, but it would require resources, timing, and considerable risk. Brett leaned forward. Name your price. It's not about money, Brett. We served together. I owe you my life from that IED incident in Kandahar. But this could bring federal heat down on both of us for the rest of our lives. And if it was one of your daughters Heath had targeted? Frank was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the construction cranes dotting the city skyline. Federal facilities have vulnerabilities. Prisoner transport has weak points. Even protected witnesses occasionally have accidents. I'm listening. Give me 48 hours to make some calls. I still have contacts and agencies that might be relevant to this situation. After Frank left, Brett spent the afternoon reviewing financial records, preparing to liquidate assets if necessary. Some goals justified any cost, and ensuring Heath never threatened another child was worth sacrificing everything Brett had built. That evening, Emma sat at the kitchen table working on a school project about family history. She'd asked pointed questions about why there were no recent photos of Kelsey in the house, accepting Brett's explanation that some pictures made him sad right now. "Daddy, Ashley's mom wants to know if you'd like to join their book club," Emma said, gluing construction paper on a poster board. Brett looked up from his laptop. Ashley was Emma's best friend, and her mother, Nikki Buckley, was a pediatric nurse who'd been divorced for 3 years. Emma had mentioned her several times recently. "What kind of books do they read?" "Boring grown-up books, probably. But Ashley says there's wine and cheese, and her mom thinks you're handsome." "Emma Grace Owens, did you just try to set me up on a date?" Emma giggled. "Maybe. Ashley says her mom gets lonely sometimes, and you're lonely too even though you try to hide it." The insight from his 8-year-old daughter was both touching and unsettling. Brett had focused so intensely on business and revenge that he hadn't considered how his emotional state might be affecting Emma. "Tell Ashley's mom that I appreciate the invitation, but Daddy has some work things to finish first. Ashley says her mom is very pretty and makes good cookies." "I'm sure she does, Princess." Wednesday brought news that tested Brett's patience further. Isaac called with an update on Heath's federal status. He's been moved again, this time to a facility in Virginia. The FBI has him in deep protection while they build cases against his network associates. Word is he's providing information about international connections. International. Apparently, Heath's operation was connected to trafficking networks in Eastern Europe. His cooperation could dismantle organizations that have been operating for decades. Brett understood the federal perspective. Heath's information could save hundreds of children from exploitation. But understanding didn't equal acceptance, and it certainly didn't satisfy Brett's need for personal justice. Frank called that afternoon with an update that shifted the entire dynamic. "I've been making inquiries," Frank said. "Heath isn't just in federal protection. He's been fast-tracked for witness relocation. If his testimony proves valuable enough, he could be out of prison in 5 to 7 years with a completely new identity. That's unacceptable. There's more. My contact at the U.S. Marshal Service says Heath has been asking about your family's current status. Specifically, he's been inquiring about Emma's school, your address, and your business locations." Brett's blood turned cold. Why would a protected witness need that information? Exactly what I asked. The official answer is that Heath is concerned about potential retaliation affecting his cooperation. The unofficial answer is more troubling, which is, Heath's attorney is suggesting that your confrontation at his cabin constituted illegal detention and assault. He's building a case that you're an ongoing threat to his safety. Brett gripped his phone tighter. So he's trying to claim victim status, while simultaneously positioning himself for maximum federal protection. It's a smart legal strategy, assuming his goal is avoiding real consequences for his actions. After ending the call, Brett sat in his office, staring at the photo of Emma on his desk. Heath wasn't just escaping justice. He was using the system to ensure his protection while maintaining interest in Brett's family. That level of calculated manipulation confirmed Brett's assessment. Some people couldn't be reformed, deterred, or contained by legal means. They could only be eliminated. By Thursday evening, Brett had made his decision. Frank's contacts had provided enough information about Heath's protection protocols to develop a workable plan. It would require significant resources, careful timing, and accepting the possibility of life-changing consequences. But as Brett tucked Emma into bed and listened to her prayers, He knew that some risks were worth taking. His daughter deserved to grow up in a world where predators faced real consequences for their actions. "Daddy," Emma said as he turned off her bedroom light, "Ashley's mom is coming to my school play next week. She said she hopes you'll be there too." "I'll be there, princess. I wouldn't miss it. Promise?" Brett kissed her forehead. "Promise." He meant it, but first he had to ensure that Javier Heath never posed a threat to Emma or any other child ever again. Some promises required extreme measures to keep. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. The federal courthouse in Virginia looked imposing against the gray October sky as Brett sat in his rental car across the street, watching U.S. Marshals escort prisoners to various hearings. Frank sat beside him, studying the building's security through high-powered binoculars. "Third floor, East Wing," Frank said quietly. "That's where they're holding Heath for his testimony sessions." Brett checked his watch. "How long until the next transport?" 2 hours. He'll be moved back to the detention facility at exactly 3 p.m. Same route they've used for the past week. They've been conducting surveillance for 3 days, identifying patterns in federal security protocols. Frank's contacts had provided inside information about Heath's schedule, including the detail that most interested Brett. Heath's transport was vulnerable during a specific 2-minute window on the route back to detention. "You sure about this?" Frank asked, lowering the binoculars. "Once we move, there's no going back. Federal agents don't forget, and they don't forgive." Brett thought about Emma's school play tomorrow evening, about her innocent trust that Daddy would always protect her, about the life she deserved to live without looking over her shoulder for predators who'd escaped justice. "I'm sure." At 2:45 p.m., they moved to their predetermined position, a construction zone where Frank's connections had arranged for legitimate roadwork that would provide cover for what was about to happen. Brett's construction company had worked federal contracts before. His crews knew how to coordinate with law enforcement for traffic control. The transport van appeared exactly on schedule, following the same route it had used all week. 2 U.S. Marshals in the front, Heath and another prisoner in the rear compartment. No chase car, because this was supposed to be a routine movement between secure facilities. Frank's improvised explosive device, small, precise, designed to disable rather than destroy, detonated under the van's front axle. The vehicle lurched to a stop, steam rising from the damaged engine compartment. Brett and Frank approached from opposite sides, wearing construction workers' safety vests and hard hats that made them invisible in the work zone. The marshals were already calling for backup and medical assistance, focused on the mechanical failure they assumed had occurred. "Need assistance, officers?" Brett called out, jogging toward the van with a concerned expression. "Stay back, sir." "Federal transport. I'm a contractor working this zone. We've got medical equipment and tools if you need them." The distraction lasted exactly long enough for Frank to access the rear compartment through techniques he'd learned during specialized military training. Heath was unconscious from the impact, making the extraction considerably easier than Brett had anticipated. 7 minutes later, Heath was secured in the back of Brett's truck, still unconscious but breathing. The marshals were dealing with backup units and investigators trying to determine if the mechanical failure was sabotage or coincidence. By the time federal agents realized Heath was missing, Brett and Frank were already 50 miles away, heading toward a location Frank had prepared for exactly this contingency. The abandoned mining facility in West Virginia had been closed for 15 years, its underground passages extending miles into the mountain. Frank had used similar locations for training exercises with private military contractors, places where sound didn't carry and satellite surveillance couldn't penetrate. Heath regained consciousness as they were carrying him into the mine's main shaft. The look of recognition in his eyes when he saw Brett was satisfying in a way that no federal conviction could have provided. "This is kidnapping of a federal witness," Heath said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "You'll both face life sentences, assuming anyone finds you," Frank replied, securing Heath to a chair they'd positioned in one of the larger chambers. Brett pulled out a folding table and arranged the documents Isaac had compiled, evidence of Heath's crimes that went far beyond what federal investigators had uncovered. financial records showing payments to corrupt officials, photographs of victims from multiple states, communications with international trafficking networks. "Let's discuss accountability," Brett said, sitting across from Heath in the underground chamber. "You're going to receive a reduced sentence for cooperation. 5 to 7 years for orchestrating the exploitation of dozens of children. I provided valuable intelligence. You provided information to save yourself while continuing to gap." Brett slid a tablet across the table showing surveillance footage Frank's contact had obtained. Heath during federal debriefing sessions, asking detailed questions about the families he'd targeted, ostensibly to help investigators, but actually to satisfy his own continued obsession. Even in federal protection, you couldn't stop thinking about the children you'd missed. Heath's silence confirmed Brett's assessment. "Frank, show him what we found in his protected witness housing." Frank produced evidence bags containing items that had been concealed in Heath's federal facility. Sketches of children, maps of school districts, and notes about families with single parents who might be vulnerable to manipulation. "You were planning to resume operations after your testimony was complete," Brett continued. "New identity, new location, same victims. You can't prove. I don't need to prove anything. Federal courts require evidence and due process. I require only certainty." Brett stood and walked deeper into the mine shaft, where Frank had prepared additional equipment. When he returned, Heath's composure finally cracked. "What do you want? Money? I can access accounts. I want justice. The kind that ensures you never threaten another child." Over the next hour, Brett extracted confessions about crimes that would never see court proceedings, details about victims who would never receive legal closure, and admissions about plans that would never be implemented. Frank recorded everything, creating a final record of Heath's true nature that would be distributed to victims' families and law enforcement agencies. "Please," Heath said as Brett prepared the final phase of his plan. "I'll disappear. New identity, different country. You'll never hear from me again." "You're right," Brett agreed. "I'll never hear from you again." The mining shaft had deep pools of acidic water left from decades of industrial operations. Bodies that entered those pools were never recovered, dissolved completely by the chemical processes that continued long after the mining operations ceased. "Any last thoughts about the children you destroyed?" Brett asked. Heath's final words were a combination of pleas and threats that confirmed every assumption Brett had made about his character. Some people couldn't be reformed or deterred. They could only be eliminated. As the sun set over the West Virginia mountains, Brett and Frank were already driving back toward Virginia. Heath's disappearance would trigger a massive federal investigation, but the mining facility had been chosen specifically because it provided no evidence trail. Brett arrived home Friday evening just in time to shower and change clothes for Emma's school play. She performed beautifully as a fairy in the Halloween production, her face lighting up when she spotted him in the audience. Nikki Buckley was indeed very attractive, and she did make excellent cookies, which she shared with Brett after the performance while their daughters played together backstage. "Emma's talked about you quite a bit," Nikki said, her brown eyes warm with interest. "She's mentioned you as well. Something about book clubs and loneliness." Nikki laughed. "She's quite the little matchmaker. Though I should mention, I usually prefer my first dates to involve less premeditation from 8-year-olds. So this is a date, if you'd like it to be." Brett looked across the gymnasium at Emma, who was giggling with Ashley while they collected their costume accessories. His daughter deserved a stable, happy life, and maybe that life could include other people who understood the importance of protecting children. "I like that very much." As they made plans for dinner the following weekend, Brett reflected on the events of the past month. Justice had been served, threats had been eliminated, and life was moving forward. The federal investigation into Heath's disappearance would continue for months, but it would ultimately conclude that a protected witness had somehow vanished without a trace. One of those bureaucratic failures that occasionally occurred in complex cases. Brett Owens had protected his family, ensured appropriate consequences for those who'd threatened them, and was now free to focus on building a future rather than seeking revenge. Some battles were worth fighting, regardless of the personal cost. Chapter 7. Federal Heat. 3 weeks after Heath's disappearance, FBI Special Agent Darren Vaughn arrived at Brett's office unannounced. Brett was reviewing blueprints for a new hospital complex when his secretary informed him that federal agents were requesting an immediate meeting. "Mr. Owens, I'm investigating the disappearance of federal witness Javier Heath," Agent Vaughn said, settling into the chair across from Brett's desk. He was younger than Brett had expected, maybe 35, with the kind of intense focus that suggested either ambition or genuine dedication. "I read about that in the news. Something about a transport vehicle malfunction. You were aware Mr. Heath was in federal custody?" "Detective Ferguson kept me informed about the case involving my family. I assumed Heath would be in custody given the charges." Agent Vaughn consulted his notes. "You confronted Heath at his mountain cabin. You extracted confessions. You provided evidence that led to federal charges. I provided evidence that proved my wife was facilitating child exploitation. Heath's federal charges were based on what authorities discovered independently." "Mr. Owens, where were you on October 15th between 2 and 4 p.m.? Brett pulled out his phone and scrolled through his calendar. "Meeting with the City Planning Commission about permit approvals for the Riverside Heights project. I can provide witnesses." "And Frank Erickson? When did you last speak with him?" Brett's expression didn't change, though internally he noted that federal investigators had identified Frank's involvement. "Frank's an old Army buddy. We grab beers occasionally when he's in town. He was in town October 15th. Was he? I didn't see him that day." Agent Vaughn studied Brett for a long moment. Mr. Heath was providing information about an international trafficking network. His testimony could have saved hundreds of children from exploitation. Then it's unfortunate someone decided he was worth more dead than alive. "Who says he's dead?" Brett shrugged. "Missing federal witness, no ransom demands, no communication. Either he's dead or he's escaped federal protection to resume his activities. Either way, he's not saving any children." The interview continued for another 30 minutes, with Agent Vaughn probing for inconsistencies in Brett's timeline and connections to Heath's disappearance. Brett answered every question directly while providing no useful information. After the agent left, Brett called Frank using a disposable phone purchased specifically for such communications. "Federal visit?" Frank asked. Agent Vaughn. "Professional, thorough, suspicious. They're interviewing everyone with connections to Heath. My former commander got a visit yesterday. Are you concerned?" "Not yet, but we should assume ongoing surveillance and act accordingly." That evening, Brett attended Emma's parent-teacher conference, followed by dinner with Nikki and Ashley. Their relationship had developed naturally over the past 3 weeks, providing Emma with the stable family environment she needed while giving Brett something positive to focus on. "You seem distracted tonight," Nikki observed as they sat on her porch after the children had gone inside to watch a movie. "Work stress. Federal contracts involve a lot of bureaucracy." Nikki studied his face in the porch light. "Brett, I work with traumatized children every day at the hospital. I recognize the signs of someone carrying heavy burdens." Brett considered how much truth he could share with a woman he was beginning to care about deeply. "Emma's been through a difficult time with her mother's departure. I'm still working through my own emotions about that situation. The news coverage mentioned child endangerment charges against someone connected to your family, someone who will never threaten children again." Something in Brett's tone made Nikki lean back slightly. "That sounds very final. Some threats require permanent solutions." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both understanding that certain topics would remain unspoken between them. Nikki was intelligent enough to read between the lines, and compassionate enough to recognize that some actions, while legally questionable, might be morally justified. The following week brought increased federal pressure. Agent Vaughn returned with additional questions, this time accompanied by a federal prosecutor who outlined potential charges for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to interfere with federal investigations. "We know you're involved, Mr. Owens," the prosecutor said. "Heath's disappearance required planning, resources, and inside information about federal security protocols. That points to someone with military experience and significant financial resources. It also points to dozens of other potential suspects," Brett replied calmly. Heath victimized children across multiple states. Any parent whose child was targeted would have motivation to ensure he faced appropriate consequences. Are you suggesting vigilante justice? I'm suggesting that when the legal system fails to protect children adequately, parents might seek alternative solutions. Agent Vaughn leaned forward. The legal system was working. Heath was cooperating fully with federal investigators. Heath was manipulating federal investigators while planning to resume his activities under a new identity. His cooperation was calculated self-interest, not genuine reform. The accusation hung in the air between them. Brett had no way to prove his claim without revealing how he'd obtained the information, but the federal agents couldn't disprove it without acknowledging gaps in their own investigation. After they left, Brett spent the afternoon reviewing security for his home and business. Federal surveillance was sophisticated, but it wasn't impenetrable. If they intended to build a case against him, he needed to ensure they found nothing useful. That weekend, Brett took Emma and Ashley to the state fair, maintaining normal activities while federal agents observed from a distance. Nikki joined them for the evening fireworks display, creating the appearance of an ordinary blended family enjoying simple pleasures. "Daddy, why are those men following us?" Emma asked as they walked toward the car. Brett looked back to see Agent Vaughn and his partner attempting to blend in with the crowd. Sometimes adults have to watch other adults for work reasons. Like when you have to watch Ashley's little brother at the playground. That seems boring. Very boring, princess. As they drove home, Brett noticed the surveillance vehicle maintaining careful distance behind them. Federal agents were skilled, but Brett had learned counter-surveillance techniques during his military service that remained effective against domestic law enforcement. By the following Tuesday, Brett had identified patterns in the federal surveillance that would allow him to move freely when necessary. More importantly, he'd received information from Isaac that changed the entire dynamic of the federal investigation. "They've lost interest in Heath," Isaac reported during their weekly meeting. New intelligence suggests he was eliminated by associates who considered him a liability rather than by victims seeking revenge. What kind of intelligence? Communications intercepted from Eastern European trafficking networks. Apparently, Heath's cooperation exposed operations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His former partners had more motivation to eliminate him than any domestic victims. Brett smiled grimly. Frank's military contact had apparently planted evidence suggesting international involvement in Heath's disappearance, directing federal attention away from domestic suspects. "Agent Vaughn still considers you a person of interest," Isaac continued, "but the investigation is shifting focus toward international organized crime. How long before I'm cleared? Federal bureaucracy moves slowly, but you should see reduced surveillance within a month. They can't justify continued resources on domestic suspects when international evidence suggests otherwise." That evening, Brett sat on his back deck, watching Emma and Ashley play in the yard while Nikki prepared dinner in his kitchen. The domestic scene felt both natural and surreal after the violence of the past month. "Everything okay?" Nikki asked, bringing him a beer and settling into the chair beside him. "Getting better. Work complications are resolving themselves." "Good. Emma needs stability right now. And frankly, so do you." Brett reached over and took her hand. "What we're building here, it's important to me. It's important to all of us." As the sun set behind the trees, Brett reflected on the changes in his life. Justice had been served, federal heat was diminishing, and he was building something positive with a woman who understood that protecting children sometimes required difficult choices. The federal investigation would eventually conclude without charges. Heath would never threaten another child, and Brett's family would move forward without looking over their shoulders. Some victories came at a high price, but they were still victories. Chapter 8. New Foundations. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, with snow falling steadily outside Brett's house. Emma and Ashley were already awake, examining presents under the tree while Nikki made coffee in the kitchen. The scene felt wonderfully normal after months of chaos and federal scrutiny. "Daddy, look what Santa brought." Emma held up a new digital camera, her face glowing with excitement. Brett smiled, remembering Kelsey's obsession with photography equipment for very different purposes. Emma's interest in taking pictures of flowers and pets represented innocence reclaimed. That's wonderful, princess. Maybe you can take some pictures of our Christmas dinner. Nicky appeared in the doorway, wearing one of Brett's sweaters and looking perfectly at home in his kitchen. They've been officially living together for 2 months, and the arrangement benefited everyone involved. Emma had a stable maternal figure. Ashley had a father presence she'd never known, and Brett had found unexpected happiness with a woman who understood his priorities. Agent Vaughn called yesterday. Nicky mentioned quietly while the girls were distracted with their gifts. Brett looked up sharply. Why would he call you? Routine follow-up. He wanted to confirm that you were with me on certain dates when federal witnesses were being interviewed. And I confirmed that you've been focused entirely on family and work since we started dating. Nothing about international travel or mysterious activities. Brett nodded, appreciating Nicky's casual deflection of federal inquiries. She'd never asked direct questions about Heath's disappearance, but her medical background had given her insight into trauma responses and the lengths parents might go to protect their children. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Brett answered to find Isaac Moore standing on his porch, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Sorry to interrupt Christmas, but we need to talk. Brett stepped outside, closing the door behind him. What's wrong? Federal investigation officially closed yesterday. Heath's disappearance has been attributed to international organized crime retaliation. No domestic charges will be filed. Brett felt tension he hadn't realized he was carrying finally released from his shoulders. That's good news. There's more. Kelsey's been found. The news hit Brett like a physical blow. Where? Denver morgue. Apparent suicide 3 weeks ago. She left a detailed confession about her involvement with Heath's operation, absolving you of any knowledge or participation. Brett processed this information carefully. Kelsey's final act had been to protect the family she betrayed, ensuring that Emma would never face questions about her father's actions. Does Emma need to know? That's your call. The confession will become part of the federal case file, but there's no requirement to inform minor children about deceased parents' criminal activities. Brett looked through the window at Emma, who was showing Ashley how to adjust the camera settings. His daughter had adapted well to life without her mother, and introducing new trauma seemed unnecessarily cruel. I'll tell her when she's older. For now, Mommy went away and isn't coming back. Isaac nodded and handed Brett an envelope. Kelsey's final letter, addressed to you personally. After Isaac left, Brett sat in his truck reading Kelsey's handwritten confession. She detailed her involvement with Heath's network, her recruitment of other families, and her gradual realization that she'd become something monstrous. The letter concluded with an apology that felt both genuine and inadequate. I know you'll never forgive me, and you shouldn't. But please don't let my actions poison Emma's memories entirely. I loved her, even if I lost sight of what that meant. Brett folded the letter and put it in his safe, next to other documents Emma might need to understand her history when she became an adult. Inside the house, Nicky was helping the girls set up a board game while Christmas music played softly in the background. Everything okay? She asked when Brett returned. Loose and's getting tied up. That afternoon, Brett called Frank to share the news about the federal investigation's conclusion. International organized crime, Frank said with satisfaction. My contacts did excellent work planting that evidence trail. What's your next move? Back to private security work, probably overseas. I've had offers from companies that value my particular skill set. Frank, thank you. We're even now, Brett. Take care of your family. New Year's Eve found Brett and Nicky hosting a small party for neighbors and friends. Emma and Ashley served as co-hostesses, taking their responsibilities seriously while enjoying the adult attention. This time last year, I never imagined my life would look like this. Nicky confided as they watched midnight fireworks from the back deck. Good different or bad different? Wonderful different. Emma's given Ashley the sister she always wanted, and you've given me something I thought I'd never find again. Brett pulled her closer, marveling at how much his life had changed in 12 months. The previous New Year's Eve, he'd been focused on business expansion while his wife plotted to sell their daughter to a predator. Now he was building a legitimate family with a woman who shared his values about protecting children. "I have something for you," Nikki said, producing a small wrap box. Inside was a simple gold band engraved with coordinates, the latitude and longitude of the playground where they'd first met at Emma's school event. "Nikki, I'm not proposing," she said quickly, "but I wanted you to have something that represents new beginnings. Places where good things start." Brett slipped the ring onto his right hand, touched by the gesture's symbolism. "I love you. I love you too. All of you, including the parts you think are too dark to share." As winter gave way to spring, Brett's life settled into comfortable patterns. His construction company continued expanding, with new federal contracts proving that his reputation remained intact despite the Heath investigation. Emma thrived in school, her natural intelligence complemented by the emotional stability Nikki provided. Ashley integrated seamlessly into their family structure, calling Brett Dad within 6 months of their parents' relationship beginning. The anniversary of Heath's disappearance passed without media coverage or federal attention. The case had been officially resolved, filed away with thousands of other crimes attributed to international organized crime networks. Brett occasionally thought about the abandoned mining facility in West Virginia, where justice had been served outside the boundaries of legal systems. He felt no remorse for Heath's fate, only satisfaction that a predator would never threaten another child. Some actions couldn't be undone, but they also didn't require justification. Protecting innocent children from exploitation was a moral imperative that transcended legal technicalities. On Emma's 9th birthday, as Brett watched her blow out candles surrounded by friends and the family they built together, he reflected on the choices that had brought them to this moment. The price of justice had been high, but the alternative, allowing Heath to escape consequences and potentially harm other children, had been unacceptable. Brett Owens had protected his family, eliminated threats to their safety, and built something beautiful from the ruins of betrayal. Some victories were worth any cost. Chapter 9. Legacy Secured. 2 years later, Brett stood in the maternity ward of St. Mary's Hospital, holding his newborn son through the nursery window. James Brett Owens had arrived 3 hours earlier, completing the family that had grown from tragedy and violence into something genuinely beautiful. "He looks like you," Nikki said from her hospital bed, exhausted but radiant. "Poor kid," Brett replied, though his voice carried pure joy. Emma and Ashley pressed their faces against the nursery window, comparing their new brother to other babies and declaring him obviously superior in every measurable category. "Daddy, when can we take him home?" Emma asked. "Tomorrow, princess. Then you and Ashley get to be the best big sisters in the world." The girls beamed with pride at their elevated status, already planning the ways they would spoil and protect their baby brother. As Brett held his son for the first time, he thought about the legacy he was building. James would grow up in a world where predators faced real consequences for their actions, where family meant protection and loyalty, and where justice wasn't confined to court proceedings. Dr. Nikki Owens had officially become Mrs. Owens 6 months earlier in a small ceremony attended by friends and extended family. Isaac Moore had served as Brett's best man, while Emma and Ashley shared maid of honor duties. The wedding marked not just a union between two adults, but the formal recognition of a family that had been functioning as one for over a year. "I have news," Isaac said when he arrived to visit the new baby that afternoon. Brett looked up from feeding James's bottle. "Good news or complicated news? Depends on your perspective. Gerard Elliott died in federal prison last week. Apparent heart attack, though prison medical care isn't known for thorough autopsies." Brett nodded without surprise. Frank's network included people with various specialties, and federal prison wasn't as secure as most people believed. Any federal interest in investigating? Elliott was serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole. His death saves taxpayers money and closes a case file. No one's asking questions. That evening, as Brett sat in his study reviewing construction contracts while his family slept, he reflected on the complete resolution of the Heath network. Every major player had faced consequences proportional to their crimes, Every threat to children had been eliminated, and every victim's family could rest assured that justice had been served. His phone rang. Frank Erickson, calling from somewhere in Eastern Europe where he was providing security for humanitarian operations. "Congratulations on the new edition," Frank said. "Thank you. How did you know?" "Isaac sends updates. I wanted you to know that the last loose end has been tied up." Brett understood the coded message. Elliot's death meant that no one remained alive who could connect Brett to Heath's disappearance or the broader network's destruction. "I appreciate your thoroughness. We take care of our own. Give my regards to your family." The line went dead, and Brett deleted the call from his phone's memory. Frank would continue his work protecting innocent people in conflict zones around the world, while Brett focused on building and protecting his own family's future. Emma appeared in his study doorway, wearing her pajamas and carrying her stuffed elephant. "Daddy, I had a bad dream." Brett pulled her onto his lap, holding his 9-year-old daughter close. "What was it about?" "Someone trying to take baby James away from us." Brett's jaw tightened briefly before he forced himself to relax. Emma's subconscious was processing fears based on experiences she didn't fully understand but instinctively recognized as threatening. "No one will ever take James away from us, Princess. Daddy won't let that happen." "Promise." "I promise. Our family is safe now." Emma nodded against his chest, trusting completely in her father's ability to protect them all. The next morning, Brett brought his expanded family home to a house that had been thoroughly security upgraded over the past 2 years. Cameras monitored every approach, motion detectors covered the perimeter, and panic rooms provided safe refuge if threats ever materialized. More importantly, Brett had established relationships with local law enforcement, federal agencies, and private security firms that would ensure rapid response to any threats against his family. "It's beautiful," Nikki said, looking around the nursery Brett had prepared for James. Soft colors, expensive furniture, and security systems disguised as decorative elements created an environment that was both nurturing and protected. "Only the best for our son." As spring turned to summer, the Owens family settled into routines that balanced normal childhood experiences with necessary security precautions. Emma and Ashley attended summer camps with background check counselors, played in neighborhoods where Brett knew every resident, and participated in activities where trusted adults provided supervision. James thrived under the attention of his sisters and the protection of parents who understood that safety required constant vigilance. On the second anniversary of Heath's disappearance, Brett took Emma fishing at Pine Lake, the same location where they'd camped after her mother's betrayal was discovered. "Daddy, do you think Mommy would have liked James?" Emma asked as they sat by the water. Brett considered his response carefully. Emma had never asked direct questions about Kelsey's departure, accepting the explanation that Mommy had made bad choices and couldn't live with them anymore. "Your mommy loved you very much, Princess. If she had been a better person, she would have loved James too. But she wasn't a better person." "No, sweetheart, she wasn't." Emma nodded, accepting this assessment with the pragmatic wisdom children often display about complex adult situations. "I'm glad Nikki is our mommy now. She makes better choices." "Yes, she does." That evening, as Brett put James down for the night, while Nikki helped the girls with homework, he reflected on the family he'd built from the ashes of betrayal. Emma was developing into a strong, intelligent young woman who understood that the world contained both good and evil, and that good people sometimes had to fight to protect what mattered most. Ashley had blossomed under stable parental guidance, her grades improving and her confidence growing as she learned that families could be built on trust and protection rather than fear and uncertainty. James would grow up knowing only love, security, and the certainty that his family would sacrifice anything to keep him safe. Nikki had proven herself worthy of the trust Brett placed in her, understanding without being told that some questions shouldn't be asked and some truths didn't need to be spoken. As Brett sat in his study that night, updating his will to ensure his family's security would continue even if something happened to him, he considered the choices that had brought him to this moment. Javier Heath had received justice outside the legal system, but justice nonetheless. His network had been destroyed, his associates eliminated, and his victims could rest assured that he would never threaten children again. Kelsey had faced consequences for her betrayal, making the ultimate payment for her crimes while ensuring that Emma would be protected from the full truth of her mother's actions. The federal investigation had concluded without charges, Heath's disappearance attributed to international criminals who left no witnesses or evidence. Brett Owens had protected his family, eliminated threats to their safety, and built something beautiful and lasting from the ruins of betrayal and violence. Some victories required extreme measures, but they were still victories. His children would grow up safe, loved, and protected by a father who understood that some lines should never be crossed, and that those who crossed them anyway faced consequences that transcended legal boundaries. Justice had been served, family had been protected, and the future stretched ahead bright with possibility. Brett closed his laptop and went upstairs to check on his sleeping children, listening to their peaceful breathing and feeling satisfied that he'd built something worth protecting at any cost. In the end, that's what mattered most: family, loyalty, and the willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect innocent children from those who would harm them. Some lessons were worth teaching, regardless of the personal price. And some fathers would pay any price to ensure their children's safety and future happiness. Brett Owens was one of those fathers, and his family would always be protected by a man who understood that true justice sometimes required stepping outside the boundaries of law and civilization. The price of betrayal had been paid in full, and the legacy he was building would endure long after the memories of violence had faded into history. Some stories ended with justice served and families protected. This was one of those stories. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.